to Keeping It Real. I'm Krista Gibson, your host, and I'm also the publisher of NewSpiritJournal.com. I have a very interesting guest today. Well, all of my guests are interesting. But this is a gentleman by the name of John Lockley, and he's written a book called Leopard Warrior, A Journey into the African Teachings of Ancestry, Instinct, and Dreams. Beautiful cover. You can see I've made a few page markers here. What I want to do is just read from the back of the book because it really does summarize who he is, and will give you a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. It was 1990, and the area of apartheid was finally ending. Now, John was a young white medic in the South African Army, and he had a dream. And the dream was what he called his Sangoma calling, and we're going to talk about what a Sangoma is. And this began his extraordinary odyssey beyond the barriers of race, culture, and belief into the world of the shaman. It took him from the hills of South Korea, where he was training as a student under a Zen master, to the rural African landscape of the Eastern Cape and the tradition of the Sangoma mystic healers, who ultimately confirmed the true meaning of his calling dream. So this book, Leopard Warrior, shares the remarkable story of how John became one of the first modern white men in recent history to become a fully initiated Sangoma, a traditional priest and healer in the, and I'm going to get him to tell me how to say this word, the Xhosa lineage of South Africa, the same tribe of Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. In his memoir, he introduces readers to what he calls the way of the leopard, a shamanic path for awakening to our intuition and connection to the spirit world. Fabulous book, really reads like a spiritual adventure story, and then towards the end he provides kind of his teachings and what is a leopard warrior. So we're going to talk to John and find out more about his journey directly from him and more about his teachings. I think we're going to really enjoy this, and it's going to be quite fascinating. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. And here's John Lockley, who I just introduced you to, who's the author of Leopard Warrior. John, so happy that you could be here, and I understand you're in Ireland.
Yes.
So I know you wrote all about your journey from, being a medic and Zen Buddhism and becoming a Sangoma. Could you give an overview to our viewers? Just kind of talk about that journey a little bit, kind of how that all happened.
How much time have you got?
I know. Well, that's why I say they need to read the book. But if you could just give a quick overview of that, and then I have some other questions, that would be awesome.
Okay, well, a quick overview is I wanted to write this book so I could talk to people about the process of finding peace, because I was born in a war zone, and from the age of about 6, I just wanted to find peace. I wanted to understand why people were fighting each other, and how to put an end to war. Mm-hmm. So the book is about a wilderness journey inside. It's about mysticism, which is connecting with the wilderness inside and with the great mystery, which is why are we alive. Mm. And the journey is also a journey with nature, and a journey of magic and connecting with the plants and animals. Mm-hmm. And then it's a journey of putting an end to war, and finding the root cause of warfare and how to create peace. So it's 3 things really. It's a mystical journey of finding the wilderness inside ourselves. It's a journey of connecting very, very deeply with nature, with plants and animals and spirits. And it's a journey of finding peace through acknowledging the shadow and acknowledging the war around us, and looking inside ourselves to find an end to war. So how this all happened for me was, it started with my mother in Dublin, and she was walking the pier in the 1950s, the Dunleary Pier, which is a very well-known pier here in Ireland. And she had this vision of African elephants, and they were beckoning to her, calling her. And for a while, she'd had this passion and love affair for Africa. And when she had this vision of these elephants beckoning to her, she felt that she needed to act on that and actually go to Africa. And if you know my mother, you'd know this is quite remarkable, because she's not hippie in any way. She's very grounded, And in those days, in the 1950s or 1960s, there was no time in Ireland to be hippie and to be spiritual in any way, because it was a poor country and people had to make a living. So it was a huge thing for her as a woman on her own to leave Ireland and her family and go on her own all the way to Africa. Right. So part of the story is also acknowledging this incredible journey that my mother went on in order for me to become a medicine man in South Africa and to be a nature doctor, and then bring these teachings, these deep-rooted indigenous teachings, bring them back to the Western world through Ireland, which is what I'm doing. Right. So when I was born with this white clay around my eyes, which my Xhosa teacher said is the sign of the Sangoma, the sign of the traditional shaman, the Xhosa Sangoma. And as I came out of my mother's womb with white clay around my eyes, I was born beneath Table Mountain. My mother said I looked like a little Aborigine because she had just come from Australia with my dad. And then the white doctor frowned and he was really shocked. And the Xhosa nurses ululated. And my father smiled and laughed because my mother is very funny. You know, she's got a great sense of humor. But she made a point about me coming out with these very stark white rings around my eyes, like white clay. Like which I say, years later when my mother met my teacher, my Xhosa teacher, she had forgotten my birth. And as my Xhosa teacher came through the gate, she had this beautiful white clay around her eyes. And my mother remembered my birth. And she sat down with my teacher and she said, you know, when John was born, he was born with this kind of white clay, just like you've got around his eyes. And she said, of course, because he was born to become a Sangoma. And I was born in the same way. Right. So when I was born, there was 3 wars going on, 3 major wars. There was a war in Ireland, in Belfast. And I was aware of my mother being on the phone and checking in with our relatives, some of whom actually lived in Belfast. And I'm sure a lot of people remember the war in Belfast and Northern Ireland. And then there was a second war, and that was in Rhodesia, in Zimbabwe, which my father comes from. And that was what we call the Bush War. And my uncle, my father's brother, was a senior army officer in Rhodesia at the time. And then the third war was apartheid, where it was one of the first forms of social engineering in the world, and it was very painful for a lot of people. This was the civil war in South Africa, and from the age of 6, I was aware of these 3 wars, because we'd go and visit. We visited my grandmother in Ireland, and we went to Belfast, and I remember pulling my mother's dress, and I must have been about 5 or 6. And I was staring at the soldier at the entrance to the shop. And he had an M16 rifle. And he must have been a young guy. He must have been about 18 or 19. But everyone was much older than me because I was only, 6, like I said, 5, 6. And I pulled my mother's dress and she said, honey, what is it? And I said, mommy. And she said, what is it, my boy? And I pointed to the soldier and I said, it's just like back home, mommy, just like back home. Oh. And then my second memory was going to Rhodesia and seeing all the soldiers in the tanks and seeing all the animals that had been killed to feed the soldiers. And then the third memory was just being very aware growing up of what was happening in South Africa. So these 3 things got stronger and stronger for me until at the age of 16, I started receiving these very profound dreams. And one of the profound dreams I speak about is I was searching for gold in South America, and as I was searching for gold, it was very magical, but very powerful, and also very difficult. And as I woke up from this particular dream, I actually found the gold. And as I woke up, there was this woman's voice, and she said to me, "In order for you to find your destiny, you need to encounter death." And as I woke up, I realized what it meant, because I was soon to become conscripted into the South African Army, and I realized that I needed to become a medic. and I needed to become an operational medic, which means go to the front lines and help the soldiers, and also come face to face with death and my own death. And there was a kind of a joyfulness inside of me because I realized I was coming close to my own destiny, my own calling. So the South African Army, there was a big war on in Angola for 10 years, which was the equivalent of our Vietnam in South Africa. And that war ended around 1990, in December 1990. And then I was drafted into the South African Army in January 1991. And because the war had ended, I wasn't sent to the front lines in Angola. I was sent into a military hospital. And so that's where I trained as a medical orderly. And my first assignment was helping to rehabilitate soldiers, special forces soldiers from the front lines. So that's how I started learning about war and peace and how to find an end to warfare. So I just want to just share one brief story, which has got to do with the soldiers and how these special forces soldiers trained me, actually. And one day I remember going to the ward, and because it was apartheid, the ward was not segregated. It was just black and white guys all together, all soldiers. And the only segregation was there was different rooms. There's rooms for white guys and then rooms for black guys, but everyone got the same treatment. Everyone was looked after in the same way. And I'm very pleased to say that, because that's what I was aware of that. But for some reason, every day when I'd walk into the room of the black special forces guys, I asked them if they had any good dreams. And I don't know why I did that, because I didn't do it with white guys, but I don't know why. Just unconsciously, I walked into their room. I opened the curtains and I said, "Good morning, guys. Did you have any good dreams?" And everyone was quiet. And I did this for 3 consecutive days. And on the third day, everyone was quiet again. And I opened the curtains and I said, "Good morning, guys. Did you have any good dreams?" And then suddenly there was this voice at the back of the room, and this Sergeant in Ndlovu, who's a special forces Zulu sergeant. He said to me, "Medic, come over here. I want to speak to you." So I went to his side and I said to him, "Yes, Sergeant, sir. How can I help you, sir?" And he said to me, "Medic, in my culture, dreams are very sacred. When I dream, my ancestors show me who's going to live and who's going to die in my platoon. I tell my men, some of them laugh at me, but they still die. In my dream and my culture, dreams are very sacred. Please don't ask me again if I've had any good dreams." And I said, "Yes, Sergeant, sir, thank you." Now, Sergeant Ndlovu was becoming a Sangoma. He was becoming a traditional healer, a traditional shaman in South Africa. And part of that means engaging with illness and engaging with the other side, with death. And he gave me, what I just shared with you now, is my first Sangoma story, teaching story, because a few months after that, I received my own calling in the form of a dream, where I saw a Sangoma teaching me about the future, and teaching me about healing, and I had to make a decision to accept the training or not. So I accepted the training, and I speak about that in the dream, in the book that I wrote. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to find my teacher in flesh and blood, because it was apartheid. So I was called to South Korea and trained to become a student under the well-known Zen master called Subong and Sung San Sunsa Desunsanim in South Korea. So they trained me and offered me to become a monk in South Korea. And I declined because I wanted to vote for Nelson Mandela. And I realized that my job was to become a traditional African monk, a traditional African healer, a Sangoma. So I went back to South Africa, voted for Mandela, and then a few years later, I was invited by my teacher, who's a Xhosa Sangoma in the Xhosa nation, the same nation as Nelson Mandela. She and her husband and other elders invited me to become their apprentice, to become her apprentice, and to train me, and this is what happened. So my teacher had a dream before I came to her, my Xhosa teacher, and in her dream she said the Great Spirit came to her and said that she needed to prepare herself to train someone to become a Sangoma like herself. The someone is going to come from another culture. And then when she woke up, she felt something was going to happen to her that day. And then in the afternoon, I came through her gate for a divination session, and she said I was the one that she dreamt about, and I was the one that she had to apprentice. So when I sat down, she spoke about the last 7 years of my life and how sick I'd been, and how I had the calling illness. And then she said to me, do you want to become a Sangoma? Do you want to become my apprentice? And I said to her, what does it mean to become a Sangoma? Because I was brought up in the old ways in South Africa, and I had no idea about South African traditional healing. And all I knew was witch doctors because of colonialism. And I knew that there was something wrong about this whole thing. I knew that witch doctors and all of that there was something off. So I said, what does it mean to become a Sangoma? And she said, to become a Sangoma means you're going to be able to heal people in all different ways. The ancestors are going to move through you and teach you and share with you the wisdom that they have. And you're going to stop being so sick, and you're going to become stronger. So I said to her, okay, I'll become a Sangoma. I accept the position. And she said, okay, we'll come tomorrow and I'll give you your first white beads. So that's how it happened. And then I trained with her for 10 years. So this is a long story, and I want to stop right there. But just to tell the reader and the viewer that I wrote the story because it was such a magical thing that happened to me that I wanted to share it with the world. And the sharing has got to do with Ubuntu, it's got to do with humanity. The fact that I am Irish, I am English, and I am Xhosa, adopted Xhosa. And I know some people struggle with it because I have white skin. And I say, welcome, Wamkelekile. Welcome to the human race. Welcome to the complications and complexities of being human. Listen to my story, not because I'm a wonderful person, but because I'm touching on ancient cultures and ancient stories that we are all touching on as human beings. And I say, welcome. Welcome to the human race. Welcome to Ubuntu. Let us come together and let us help one another. Let us love one another, and let us love nature.
And I think thank you, and I encourage people to read the book because, you go into a lot of detail, but one of the things that I did want to ask you about is one of the things that you talk about is with the troubles that the world is having right now, that part of what needs to happen is a return to some of our basic teachings, the teachings of Africa. And you talk about soul loss and dealing a lot with our ancestors and those kinds of things. And so I was wondering if you could just speak about that briefly, in terms of how the teachings that you have, how people can take these and use them in our daily lives, so that we can start turning this whole thing around that's going on.
Yes, I mean, the first thing to bear in mind is that we are children of nature. And in order to heal ourselves, we need to look to nature. So if a tree is sick, what a tree does, it automatically pulls the sap from its roots. It draws up from its roots. If it just does it from its branches, it's not going to recover, it's going to die. So the way a tree stays healthy is it pulls the sap from the earth and from its roots into itself. And that's how it survives. And that's how you've got oak trees that are 600-700 years old in London today. So human beings, what we need to do is honor our ancestors. And to honor one's ancestors is not religious. It's spiritual, and it's something that is found in every culture and nation of mankind, because to forget where you come from means that you're going to forget who you are, and you'll forget your future. You won't have much of a future. So in order for us to connect with our gifts, we need to first look to our mother's nation and then accept and call on our mother's people. And we need to look to our father's nation and accept and call and love them and thank them for the gift of humanity and bring them into us. So each person has got a tattoo under their left foot. And if you look very carefully, you'll see that tattoo. And that tattoo says, if you look very carefully now, you'll see a little tattoo there underneath your left foot.
Okay.
And it says, and mine will say made by the Kellys, because my mother's people are the Kellys. Okay. And yours will say made by whoever your mother's people are. And if you look under your right foot, there's another tattoo. And under the right foot, it says made by, and that's by your father's people. So mine says made by the Lockleys. Uh-huh. So you need to look very carefully. Otherwise, you're going to miss that tattoo.
Right.
And the reason why we need to acknowledge our ancestors is because we have to acknowledge the gift of our humanity. And that gift has got a vessel. And that vessel is mother and father, mom and dad. So the way I see this process is a very mystical way, and I see it as a triangle. We are dropped into this physical realm from the consciousness or the matrix or the great spirit. We are dropped into it, and we are birthed through mother's people and father's people, creating a human being. So in order for us to come to terms with our humanity, we have to give thanks for our gift as human beings. And then the gift opens and we connect with our vision. To all indigenous people around the world, doesn't matter where you're from or who trained you, the most important is that each human being gets a vision, for their life. And the way we get a vision for our life or a dream for our life is we honor the gift of our humanity, which means honoring our mother's people and our father's people, honoring our ancestry. Because, each human being is born human, but we have to decide to become human. Mm-hmm. So there's many human beings nowadays running around the world who are not connected to their humanity. Right. They are not connected to the gift of being human. Mm-hmm. So the gift of being human comes with veneration and honoring of this precious gift that is given to you. And if you look at Buddhism, Buddhism is very shamanic, because Buddhism talks about honoring the gift of being human. If you look at Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, he will bring in some teachings of ancestry. And if you look at the three jewels of Buddhism, which is Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the third jewel of Sangha is all about humanity. And this is like a missing teaching that came from the East into the West. And for some reason in the Western world, people are not connected to the third jewel of Buddhism, which is the Sangha, which is humanity. Mm-hmm. And when I was in Singapore and in Korea, I noticed at the temples that people would bow 3 times. They would bow to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and they would light 3 sticks of incense. And they would also bow to their ancestors. Mm-hmm. And when you looked into it more and you spoke to the local people and you watched them and you observed, as I did as a young man, I saw this great veneration for ancestors because of this gift, right. Honoring the gift of being a human being.
Yeah, as I was reading your book, and because one of the things you talk about is, honoring your ancestors, I thought, isn't it interesting at this part of time how many people are getting their DNA tested, through Ancestor.com and places like that? Yeah. I think it's really interesting because it's like there's suddenly, it's beneath the surface, but people are starting to feel, well, I need to know more about where I come from. I need to know more about my people. And so I think that when I read your book, it's like, that's a more surface level way of people starting to learn more about their ancestors, and perhaps that will lead us more towards honoring our history and our people.
Yeah, and I just need to make a very important point around this. What we are doing in this practice, the practice I'm teaching, is not about getting information.
Right.
So people want to know about their ancestors and looking for dates, and they say that I'm adopted, I don't know the dates and the names. I'm like, it doesn't matter. They say, what does it mean? It doesn't matter. The most important is that you light a candle and you connect with your bones and you feel your heartbeat, and you, inside of you and outside of you, you just bow to your mother's people and your father's people, whether you know their names or not. It's that action of humility. Humility opens the way to grace. Grace opens the way to your gift. Your gift opens the way to helping this world.
I'm glad you said that, because I know there's, for some of us, like for me, I never met my grandparents. I know very little about my people in that sense. And so it's really nice to hear you say that that's not really what it's about. It's not necessarily the particular people. It's much bigger than that. That's what I just heard you say.
Yes, of course, because otherwise people start going into their heads again. And this is the problem with the world. It's good for us to use our intelligence. I mean, I had to use my intelligence to write a book.
Right.
I have to use my intelligence when I'm giving therapy to a client.
Right.
But the focus is much deeper than using words and information. The focus is outside. The focus is the seagull. The focus is the birds and the trees. And what do I mean by that? If you ask a pigeon, does the pigeon know the names and dates of its ancestors? No, it will look at you and just go, woo, woo, woo. It won't, But let me tell you something. The pigeon and the dove are connected to their ancestors. Why is that? Because the grace of their movements is showing that they appreciate the gift of life that they have.
That's beautiful.
Which means they are appreciating their ancestors and their bones and the beauty of this life. And this is what we need to do as human beings, because we have a responsibility as caretakers of this world. And the first thing we have to do, the first thing every human being has to do, is accept the gift of their humanity and accept that, and then they can become a human being through grace.
Beautiful. Thank you. Beautiful. Now, we're coming to the end of our time, so I wanted to mention for people in the Seattle area that you're going to be in Seattle towards the end of August, August 31st, I believe, and you're giving a book signing and a talk. And, so people who would like to meet you and learn more about what you're doing. And then you also have a website and a Facebook page. If people want to know where you have your events and those things scheduled, I assume, on your website?
Yes, it's all there. Yeah.
Perfect. So people want to learn more about you, that's easy to do.
Well, it's not really about learning about me. My job is to help you to learn about you.
That's right.
So my job is to empower people and not to give them information as such. Give them enough information, but then the people have to do their work.
Right. Exactly.
Nowadays, I'm encouraging people to stand up and feel their own power. I'm not encouraging followers. I'm encouraging people to start to stand and become a human being, because that's what this world needs.
Right. Well said. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate your time, and I encourage everybody to get your book, read it, and you have some practices at the end that we won't go into, but there's some beautiful practices there for people that want to do more of what you're talking about. So thank you so much, and I wish you great success with your book, John.
Thanks, Krista. Thank you.
Wow, what an interesting interview. He had so much to say, and it's almost one of those that I personally will want to sit down and listen again, because when I'm actually conducting the interview, of course, I'm having to pay attention to, what's going on. And I don't know if you heard it, but those musical sounds, if you did hear them during the interview, on John's end, he told me off air that it was the ice cream truck going by. And if you heard kind of a roaring sound, that was a train going by on my end. So I told him, I said, that's the thing, unless we were both in, soundproof booths, life happens and sounds happen. So if you heard both of those sounds, that's what they were, an ice cream truck and a train. Is there a metaphysical meaning? I haven't a clue. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed meeting John. And if you're in the Seattle area and you can get to East West Bookshop, August 31st, you can actually meet him and get a copy of his book if you haven't already gotten it, and work with some of his ideas and principles. They're really, really good. He has a lot of good things to say. So thank you so much for your time and for joining me here. And as I say every time, remember, keep it real. Your spirituality is not something to put on a shelf. It's something to be lived. Keep it real. Until next time.